Hey everybody, you're watching ABC News Live. Special continuing coverage here of the release of the report by Special Counsel Robert Mueller to the Attorney General Bill Barr, and of course the bombshell developments over the weekend, the 4-page summary. I'm joined by our senior investigative correspondent and Justice Department reporter, Mike Levine. We have the team from the White House to Capitol Hill as well to get the latest reaction. A lot to dig into today. We know you have a lot of questions. Our team has been out around town here in Washington talking to tourists to this town today, visiting their members of Congress, getting their questions. We'll get to some of those in a second, but want to start again with those headlines that Special Counsel Robert Mueller found no conspiracy on the part of President Trump or his campaign to collude with the Russians in the 2016 presidential election, and also made no decision on whether he obstructed the investigation. That causing a lot of controversy today, as you saw there, dominating the headlines today, Mike. And this is a story that you have been immersed in from the beginning. You were at the Justice Department yesterday when this all came down. What was it like there inside as this news came out after so much anticipation?
It was super intense. It was stressful. There was buzz. You could sort of feel, on Friday, you could feel that something was about to happen. Then he issues his first notification that what came out yesterday would be coming. Yesterday, it was that all over again, deja vu. And then when we saw the final results, I think all the reporters who had been covering this for so long were surprised to hear that Mueller could not reach a conclusion, a final conclusion on whether there was obstruction of justice.
And we're going to dig into what all of that means here in this special half hour on ABC News Live, particularly that question of obstruction of justice. Special Counsel Robert Mueller making a determination not to make a determination, very clearly stating in the letter that he was neither prosecuting nor exonerating President Trump on that question, and that is where much of the political fight will be ahead. We're seeing a picture of the letter that the Attorney General sent to Capitol Hill yesterday. That's the one that Mike received at the Justice Department. We will break that down for you. But first, some breaking reaction coming in from the White House. The president clearly feeling vindicated by all of this, and good reason. So much of the country also relieved that there was, in fact, no conspiracy on the part of the president in that Russian interference, which did, in fact, happen. They did interfere in our election. The president saying he is very happy with the outcome, but very regretful that this happened to him at all. Take a listen.
Lasted a long time. We're glad it's over. It's 100% the way it should have been. I wish it could have gone a lot sooner, a lot quicker. There are a lot of people out there that have done some very, very evil things, very bad things, I would say treasonous things against our country. We can never, ever let this happen to another president again. Up to the Attorney General, wouldn't bother me at all.
I'm also joined by our senior investigative reporter now, John Santucci. John, you have just been on the phone with the president's legal team and his sources working your contacts overnight. As we heard from the president, relief but regret, outright jubilation among the president's legal team just this morning.
Bouncing off the walls. I mean, I think you saw Jay Sekulow, one of the president's lead attorneys, the first attorney actually from the first iteration of the Trump team to still be a part of this growing probe here, doing every freaking show possible on television this morning because they are thrilled. I mean, they've called this the biggest win of their careers. They'll never see anything quite like this. And we have to remember that this has been going on for 22 months. We're literally in the midway point right now of the Trump presidency, 20 months until the November 2020 elections, Devin. So for them, this has been a long battle. What they were saying to us, actually, is that they know that they were attacked for quite some time for turning over everything. Remember, they allowed almost any person that Robert Mueller and his team wanted to speak to go in for interviews. They turned over every document that was requested of them, 1.2 million documents in total, that people were saying, what are you doing? You're giving them everything. But they look in hindsight and say, hey, that paid off.
And the White House are not the only ones who are relieved. The Justice Department folks are also relieved. You know, they've been working on this themselves for so long.
And they're a group of people that like to avoid politics. They don't want to be embroiled in it. They pride themselves in their independence, Mike. And this is something that has really saddled the department. We forget Jeff Sessions was heading the department not too long ago, the one who caused so much consternation from President Trump. You actually reached out to the former Attorney General. What's he saying?
I reached out to one of his reps and asked if he had any response to everything that came out yesterday. And his rep said, not at this time, but check back later.
All right, so we keep our eyes on Jeff Sessions. investigations. We might have a chance, we understand, to hear from Bill Barr as well. He, Congress says, will be summoned to Capitol Hill very soon. But let's start by digging into the letter from the Attorney General. He spent 2 days over the weekend preparing what he called the top-line principal conclusions from Mueller's report. We don't know, Mike, do we, how long Mueller's report actually is?
10 minutes ago, I asked DOJ for that answer again, and they said, we're not going to tell you.
All right, but we expected that it was quite voluminous in addition to the underlying information. And let's just tick through some of that right now, starting with this first question of conspiracy. And Mike, you can help us walk through. We have the first quote from the report, perhaps the most interesting and significant. The special counsel's investigation did not find that the Trump campaign or anyone associated with it conspired or coordinated with Russia. That's a significant top line.
No collusion, no collusion, no collusion.
Feels like a Donald Trump rally right there, Mike.
He's right. It seems like he's right about that. Mueller said that through his investigation, he found no evidence to establish that there was coordination between Russians and members of his campaign.
And John, on the second question in the letter, and I think we have this quote as well, the question of obstruction, the Attorney General said that while Robert Mueller chose not to offer a conclusion, he was going to make a conclusion. Bill Barr was making a conclusion, and he said there was no obstruction.
Yeah,
in his view.
And I think we're going to have to see when and if we get that full report, as soon as Mike can figure out how many pages it is, if we actually learn what information the special counsel's office was taking under consideration. We can sort of figure that out, right? It's going to be something related to the firing of James Comey. Going to have to probably question what happened around Michael Flynn and conversations that the president was having to, go easy on that guy was sort of the quote that we heard around that time. But also we have to remember, there was obstruction by a tweet. I mean, he was communicating with witnesses actively involved in this probe for the 22 months here.
But for now, no prosecution. Hold that thought, Mike. We do want to go to the White House now, where our chief White House correspondent, Jonathan Karl, is joining us. John, you were just in the Oval Office on the president's first day back in public after the news broke there in the West Wing. What's your take on his mood? He's obviously seemed happy, but also sort of angry. He's been kind of gruff about this whole thing.
Yeah, and not particularly chatty about this. I was actually in two events representing the TV poll. The first when they signed the statement, the proclamation on the Golan Heights, and I asked him several questions about Mueller, so did other reporters there, and I finally got him to answer one question as he was walking out, which was, simply, do you think that Robert Mueller did an honorable job? I mean, given that he had said such terrible things about Mueller, and he said yes, he did. And then in the Oval Office, I asked him if he still thinks that the Mueller investigation was a witch hunt, or if he think they at the end did a good job. And at that point, he got a longer answer. He said they went on too long. They ultimately got to the right conclusion, which was the only one that they could. But then you're right, an angry diatribe lashing out at unnamed people who he said did very terrible things during the course of this. And the line you hear from him, and I think you're going to hear a lot, Devin, is that no president should ever have to go through what he went through. Now, what he means by that, I don't know. Is he talking about changes in the special counsel regulations so we can't have special counsels anymore? What exactly is he talking about, and who now does he want to investigate on the other side?
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to watch and to reconcile his many false statements around Russia, his fawning behavior over Russia, suspicious behavior to many people, and yet the special counsel's conclusions and all. That's going to be interesting to see where that goes. But John, I also want to ask you about the full report. We hear a lot of chatter on Capitol Hill about that, wanting it to come out. The president told you just last week he wants everybody to see the report. Do you get the sense the White House is going to lean on Bill Barr to make as much of that public as possible?
No. The president was asked again today if he wanted the report to be made public, and he said it's up to Bill Barr. In other words, no leaning on Bill Barr. Barr can do what he wants, but he won't. He won't get in his way. He's fine with it if he does. But there will be a long process over at the Justice Department to decide what of this material is releasable. And in the meantime, there is going to be an intense amount of pressure. I don't think we can say it enough, Devin. 420-0, the House of Representatives voting that the report should be made public. The president himself telling me on Friday that he would like to see it, and tens of millions of his supporters would like to see it, saying today he has no problem with it being released. I think there's going to be enormous political pressure to release as much of that report as possible.
And Congress gets back in town later today. We will be hearing from them, no doubt, later this evening and the rest of the week. John Karl, our chief White House correspondent. Thanks, John, for that, coming out of the White House. And guys, as we continue to sort of pour into this 4-page letter, it's important to remind everybody no one has seen the actual report. So this is very much Bill Barr's interpretation of the report. And Bill Barr does say, to pick up where John left off, John Santucci, on page 4 of his letter, that he wants to continue to think about how much of this to make public, but he's bound by some laws. Help us understand what those laws are.
Well, I mean, really the big thing here is that a lot of it is going to be what information was brought before the grand jury. And we know that the grand jury is secret proceedings. No one can get a readout of what is said in them, the testimony. So that's going to be a question of how much information they can actually give that was presented to the grand jury, and interviews that were done before the grand jury.
And let's talk about that for a second with both of you guys. The volume of this report, we may not know how many pages it was, but Bill Barr's letter did present a snapshot of the scope. I think we have a by the numbers graphic, and let's take a look at that. Mike, this was very striking to me. The amount of interviews, subpoenas. John, you also looked at
500 interviews, 2,800 subpoenas. We saw nearly 500 search warrants. I mean, this was a long and massive list that was for there. And I think the biggest thing that stood out to me, Mike, is that, you know, for those of us that have been working on this story and we were trying to piece together what Robert Mueller is working on, what I take away from that, out of the 500 interviews, maybe I could total up about 100, something like that, but it really goes to prove the integrity by which Robert Mueller did this investigation, that we have no idea of everyone who went and met with him.
But it also goes to one of the other reasons that the Justice Department is not going to be willing to release some of the information, which is ongoing investigations. We don't know, between those subpoenas and interviews, what other threads did they pick up that they're now pursuing? And the Justice Department is not going to be releasing that information to Congress.
Well, and the other thing that stood out to me, Mike, is that, you know, from all that information he collected, one of the things that is in the 4-page letter, it's one of the lines that's kind of hidden in there, is that Mueller, when he saw something else, referred it to other offices and jurisdictions that could deal with it. Now, we know the SDNY in New York and others have been working on it, but there is potential, we don't know this for sure, but there is potential that there are other agencies across the government and within the DOJ that are looking into matters that Bob Mueller dug up.
Yes, and that have nothing to do with Trump.
Right.
That have to do with all sorts of things.
And there were a number of threads that we do know, John, that are being passed off to different districts to be prosecuted and pursued. And aside from everything that Robert Mueller uncovered, and we'll get into this in a little bit in this half hour, there's a laundry list of unrelated cases and investigations. Here are just some of them, of course. John, we've been talking about these.
I think we've done this routine about 4 times, Devin, so let's see if we can do it again. You obviously have the Southern District, New York, which has 2 big cases going on right now. They are looking into the president's campaign finance violations. Those were the payments to silence Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal made by Michael Cohen. You also have a growing investigation into the 58th Annual Presidential Inauguration Committee. That is the team that put together Donald Trump's celebration when he took the oath of office in January of 2017. And then let's not forget the trove of state cases. We know that attorney generals from New York, New Jersey, Maryland, and the District of Columbia, yes, there is an attorney general for the District of Columbia. Fun fact we all learned when doing our homework here. They are looking into Donald Trump as well. And forget the House and the Senate. I need a water break to go through all of that.
And there's yet another one,
There's
Mike.
one investigation that people may have forgotten. The Justice Department's Inspector General is currently investigating all of the claims about abuse and bias within the FBI and Mueller's team. You know, claims of abuse of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, claims that people in the Justice Department were improperly sending information from Christopher Steele to the FBI. So that's really going to show whether all of these attacks on Mueller were real or not.
Right. So much of this report's impact and controversy to continue centers on the obstruction question, the determination not being made. I want to bring in our legal analyst, Kate Shaw, now, who joins us via Skype. Kate, want to have you explain to us that portion of the Bill Barr letter in which he says that the special counsel decided not to decide whether the president had obstructed justice. What does that mean? And And what might that indicate about what evidence does or doesn't exist toward either of those ends of that equation?
Sure. Well, so the special counsel regulations are pretty general. And I think that Mueller was very much within his rights to essentially decide not to decide, to sort of say, under these circumstances, when we have this big open constitutional question about whether the president can be indicted at all, and we have Justice Department policy holding that the president can't be indicted, and you have evidence pointing in both directions, under those circumstances, I'm simply not going to make a determination one way or another. Now, we don't know exactly how Mueller frames it in his report, but that's how Barr frames it in what we saw on Friday. Or yesterday, I guess we actually first saw the letter. So what is hard to know is what Mueller intended with that non-decision decision. Did he intend to sort of pass the ball to Barr, which is essentially how Barr responded, or did he rather mean to say to Congress that we haven't enough evidence to recommend indictment? It's a sitting president. That might not even be possible. But impeachment, high crimes and misdemeanors, that's a different set of questions. So maybe, and not that Mueller intended with this report to recommend impeachment, but that he essentially meant to hand Congress his findings and let Congress make the determination over whether to pursue impeachment. Now, that's not, if that's going to happen, it's going to happen after fighting, I think, over the original report. But Barr essentially interceded, is how I read this letter, and said, we're not going to sort of allow this kind of to go directly from Mueller to Congress. Instead, I'm going to make a determination that there wasn't obstruction of justice. And let me say one more thing. It's a little peculiar that, you know, after 2 years, this is essentially the conclusion that Robert Mueller and his team come to. And it only takes a couple, you know, essentially the weekend for Barr to decide that he can make a determination that no obstruction occurred. And as far as we know, neither Mueller nor Barr had the advantage of an actual interview with the president, whose intent and state of mind would, of course, be central to the question of whether he, in fact, obstructed.
Well, we actually learned that 3 weeks ago is when Attorney General Barr learned that Mueller was not going to be reaching a conclusion here. And if you look at Barr's letter that he sent yesterday, he does say that there was some evidence pointing to possible obstruction, but that there wasn't enough evidence to bring a charge. And there are Justice Department guidelines that say that you bring charges not when there's some evidence, but when there's enough evidence that you're confident that you can convict. And so it seems that here, Barr didn't think that there was enough evidence to convict.
And of course, all of that, it would sort of, you also have the whole provision, as Kate was alluding to there, that, you know, sitting presidents can't be charged with crimes.
Yes, but Barr said specifically in his letter that that was not, that LLC
the consideration in this case.
Was not
in
correct.
this case, right, exactly. All right, Kate Shaw,
that's
thanks for
right.
that. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, just one thought, which is that Barr says that didn't figure into his analysis, but I don't think we know whether it figured into Mueller's analysis, right? At least as I read this letter, we don't know whether that thumb on the scale was, you know, important as Mueller decided what, if anything, to do on obstruction.
That's a great point, Kate. Thank you for that. Stand by, though. We're going to come back to you in just a second. We did go out on our Erica King went out on the National Mall just a short time ago, talked to people from all across the country about what questions they might have for these fine experts, and Kate Shaw and our Catherine Falders, who joins us on the Hill, about all this news. Perhaps you've got some of these questions in your mind. We're going to go through some of them now, but I want to start with a question from Spencer Hassler from Knoxville, Tennessee. Here's Spencer.
We know there's no collusion, but my question would be, what is Congress going to do next?
All right, a simple question. Let's put that one to our Catherine Falders up on Capitol Hill. Catherine, what's Congress going to do?
It sounds like a simple question, but not so much, at least right now. So, of course, the battle over making this report public has moved up to Capitol Hill. And what you're hearing from both Republicans and Democrats is that they want the report to become public, but it's a matter of what material becomes public. You hear the president saying he wants it public, but what Democrats want is all of that underlying evidence, all of that grand jury material that the White House and Republicans are saying that just can't happen, Devin. So it's unclear what exactly, you know, they're going to decide on. Now they're obviously going to argue over those two things. But what McCarthy, if you compare what these two people are saying, what McCarthy says in terms of the narrative up here is he's saying case closed. Swalwell is saying this is just the beginning. And they view, as Kate was talking about earlier there, that non-conclusion on obstruction. Some Democratic aides I've been talking to view that as now the ball's in their court. It's their job to come to a conclusion on that.
Yeah, so they're sort of gearing up to investigate the investigation after months, guys, of saying that Robert Mueller was sort of the gold standard.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, if you're a Democrat, the gold standard, and if you're a Republican,
conflicted. And now we're going to change roles. Yeah.
So much more to come. Stand by, Catherine. Thank you for that. Let's take question number 2 here. This one from a local resident here in Washington, D.C. Brian McGill had a question. Here's that one.
My question is, what are the negative consequences to full transparency of the Mueller report?
Selection. All right, so it's a fair question. A lot of people asking that. We hear Bill Barr in his letter. We've heard from pundits across the channels the past few hours that there is serious concern about releasing the full report. Mike, what might some of the negative consequences be?
When you talk to folks inside DOJ, there are really three things that are implicated here. One is they say that there are all these ongoing investigations, some that we may not know about, and those could be impacted by releasing certain information.
So sources and methods, information, perhaps potential
Well, that comes
leads.
into the second thing, which is classified information.
Right.
Okay. Sources, methods, they hold those. Those are the biggest treasures. They would never release that. And then there's also the issue of whether information derogatory to someone who has not been charged should be released. Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein has been saying for weeks now, trying to telegraph to the public that the Justice Department will not release information negative to someone who hasn't been charged.
In other words, if they've amassed some unsavory information about President Trump in the course of investigating him, they should not release it according to the guidelines because they decided not to charge him. They wouldn't want to sully him, and so perhaps there's that consideration as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually, for me, having eat, slept, breathe this whole thing every single day, I actually think the best answer I heard on that was Chris Christie speaking to George Stephanopoulos on This Week Sunday. And he said that if you looked at what we learned from an independent counsel with Ken Starr versus a special counsel, when the independent counsel came out, and Devin, you had all the books out the other day showing our viewers what it looked like. The independent counsel's review was crazy. I mean, it was a really massive stack of information. And what Christie said is that the Starr report, basically crucified people that were not going to be charged because all that information was released. In this case, because of how the guidelines are different, you're not going to see a lot of that information if the special counsel chose not to take action.
And DOJ says that they don't want to do what James Comey did, in 2016.
With Hillary Clinton, and that's what Christie said too. Yeah.
But is there ever a case, Kate Shaw, our legal analyst here, where the public interest might override these guidelines that govern your everyday case? But this is certainly not that.
Right. Well, so, maybe the extraordinary case is when the president is the subject of the investigation, right? So if DOJ, as a matter of policy, says, look, if we're not going to be able to charge someone criminally, we're not going to release derogatory information about them, that policy certainly makes some sense. But if it's someone who constitutionally can't be charged anyway, how, if at all, could some kind of release of information just with respect to the president? So I think that might be the hard question. If indictment was never a possibility in the view of the Justice Department, at the very least, it seems to me that Congress, that, the body that does have the constitutional power to, potentially, wield this ultimate sanction against a president, should be at least allowed to look at the findings of an investigation. And arguably, the public is sort of the ultimate party to whom a president is accountable. And so that too is an argument for giving this information to the public, even if it would be inappropriate in the case of any, mere mortal who could be subject to regular criminal charges, but is not going to be because the evidence simply isn't there.
Yeah, and foot the bill for the whole thing, too, north of at least $25 million. Yep. We do expect it was much higher, so perhaps that. Thanks for that, Kate. Stand by. Let's take another question. Democrats out there pretty downtrodden today, hoping that Bob Mueller would have stuck it to the president they didn't like. But here's another question from one of those. Julie Ramirez here of Washington, D.C. Let's take a listen.
Our president has a tendency to waste a lot of time and resources on the wrong things. I'm curious, what he's going to shift his focus on.
All right. What's he going to spend his time doing, John Santucci?
Okay, well, could you press the crystal ball button so it pops up? Okay, so here's the reality. And when I saw you ask this question, I was like, Devin really hates me. But the reality is this. There is two different frames here. The team at the White House, what they want the president to do, and what reality is what he's going to do. What they'll want him to do is they're going to want him to talk about immigration reform. They're going to want him to go back on health care. They're going to want him to champion the bipartisan passage of the first real criminal justice reform we've seen with the First Step Act. Okay, that's the want. The reality, Every single day for the next 20 months, we are going to hear of the wasted time we spent on this witch hunt that cost more than $25 million. He has a big rally, Devin, as you know, Thursday night in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Get ready. He is going to blast Democrats. He's going to blast Robert Mueller at any chance he gets because, as he believes, he is completely and totally exonerated. This was a witch hunt. It was out to get him, and you need to send him back because otherwise someone else can do this again to a president.
Those are all great points. Is he going to shift his focus at all to pardons? A lot of people are wondering now. Now that there has been determined no criminal conspiracy, he's been exonerated by his attorney general on obstruction. Is the president going to look at the rest of his associates who were indicted? Some pled guilty, some put behind bars. Is he going to exercise that power?
We spoke to Jay Sekulow, the president's lead attorney, for our podcast, The Investigation. That episode is going to launch tomorrow, so you can take a look out for that. But we asked him that. Has that come up? Has it been discussed? And Sekulow has repeated what we've heard from him and from his co-partner on the case, Rudy Giuliani, that it has not come up. It has not been discussed. But you have to imagine for the individuals that have been loyal to Donald Trump, that's a key word for him. Could he seek to reward them for their loyalty, like Michael Flynn, like Roger Stone? It's possible. The one person that I can almost guarantee, and I don't want to really read Donald Trump's mind too much, but this one I will take to the bank. I don't think Michael Cohen's getting a pardon.
I bet we can count on that. We are running out of time, though, guys. Want to go back to the Hill real quick and bring in our Catherine Falders, because Catherine, the next beat in this story, all the political fighting aside, the speculation about pardons, is going to be to hear from these principal actors themselves. They will appear on Capitol Hill first, in all likelihood, Attorney General Bill Barr, and then potentially, right, we could see Bob Mueller subpoenaed?
Yeah, I was just talking to a Democratic aide about this before I came over here, and that's what they want. They want them both up here on Capitol Hill. They want to hear from Bill Barr on this summary that he wrote, and they want to bring Robert Mueller up here to discuss his full report. So they are sticking to that line. You will continue to hear that from them up here. But in the meantime, as they continue to talk about this, and by the way, those close to the president tell me that they almost hope that the Democrats keep talking about this investigation and all the future investigations that they want, because as John notes, the president will capitalize on this in his rallies until 2020. So we will, exactly. So we will be hearing more about that from the Democrats. And then, of course, the White House still has to respond to a Nadler sweeping investigation into Russia ties. And they're expected, I believe, to do that sometime this week. You can imagine probably how they'll respond. So we're waiting on that as well, Devin.
All right, much to follow up on. Catherine Falders for us at Catherine Hill. Our thanks to Kate Shaw, our legal analyst, joining us remotely as well. John Santucci, Mike Levine, great to have you guys here as well. All eyes on the president's campaign rally Thursday night this week out in Michigan. We expect to hear much more about these big developments in the Mueller probe. Thanks for watching this ABC News Live special coverage. Much more to come here on ABC News Live and at abcnews.com. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. We'll see you next time.